i24 News Morning Edition. Good morning and thank you for staying with us on this July 7th. Well, July 7th also marks actually a year to what happened in this region where we're sitting right now between Israel and Hamas, and it's last year's war. Last year's war between the two sides, Israel and Hamas, lasted 51 days, but the effects of the constant bombardments, rocket fire and destruction will be felt by the victims of the war for a lifetime. Now, as the region, as we mentioned, marks a year to the conflict, we're going to take a closer look at the effects that linger on in those who sadly went through it on both sides of the border. On both sides of the border, it is usually the children also who have survived, those who have survived, that are scarred for life. A study released yesterday showed that the majority of children, nearly 70%, most of them living in areas of the Gaza Strip, hardest hit during the war, are showing signs of severe emotional distress and trauma. On the Israeli side, of course, many display the same, but it is no doubt that the images, sights and sounds of the conflict will remain with them forever. And then there are those who came in to help the wounded and face the same. And these stories we will hear today from trauma expert Jan Andrea. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Very good to have you with us. Also from the National Director of Counseling Iran for Emotional First Aid, Dr. Shiri Daniels. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
And of course, we will also be hearing from Gaza resident activist Maha Mehana, who will be joining us on the phone later on. First, though, let's watch the following report by Gabi Weiniger about children, the children victims of the war, and take it from there.
It was during Ramadan, almost at this time last year, when Amir's childhood was cut short. An Israeli airstrike destroyed his home, killing both his parents and leaving him orphaned.
When my father and my mother died, I thought I'd rather die with them than stay alone.
The 51-day war between Israel and Hamas saw more than 550 Palestinian children killed. Across Gaza, schools lost pupils and thousands were injured. Now, it's the youngest residents that are bearing the most lasting consequences of last summer's war.
When I go to bed, I can't sleep because I'm afraid of the shelling.
Not sleeping, nightmares and bedwetting are just some of the regular traumas pointed out in a new report released by Save the Children on Monday. Its title, Gaza, 1 year on, a living nightmare.
Children are experiencing a lot of fears, anxieties, and this is reflected, for example, on their sleep.
Volunteer groups are trying to help children come to terms with their trauma, with children as young as 6 living through their third war in 6 years.
They have nightmares. They cry at night. They want to sleep in the same bed as their parents. They feel frightened and useless.
The fear at night is transferred to the day. The report says more than 50% of children in some areas do not want to go to school anymore, afraid to leave their homes and feeling unsafe in school buildings.
108 UNRWA facilities were damaged during the war, including 75 schools. A number of schools were targeted and damaged, and it's impossible to teach until the reform process is complete.
1 year on, and homes and schools have yet to be rebuilt, and children still play amid the rubble, a rife example of how the enclave has been unable to recover. Save the Children says this impacts on the children day to day, exposed to violence, risk of injury, displacement, poverty and restricted movement. Across the border, children in Israel also live in fear of a return to the conflict, some of them exhibiting the same post-traumatic stress.
Sometimes I don't feel so safe because I know that even though it's a shelter, if a lot of rockets come on it, it could still break.
One Israeli child was killed during the war and 270 children injured.
As I said, we're joined in studio by actually activists and people who followed this war closely on many, many sides. Jan Andrea, I want to start with you. Where were you during the war in Gaza, after the war in Gaza? You were basically working in Gaza itself, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. During the war, I was in the Netherlands, in my hometown, Amsterdam.
Right.
And when the war was over, I said to my colleagues and my friends, we need to go and visit our communities and to pay our respect. And then a few people in the Netherlands said, if you're really going to do that, we should make a documentary about that. And that documentary about the immediate situation for traumatized people after the war is going to be shown in Tel Aviv this week.
Right.
In Sderot and also in Gaza City itself.
And also in Gaza City itself.
Yeah.
We're going to discuss this documentary in a second, but before that, when you went into Gaza, into the region after, shortly after. What did you see?
I said it like this when I came back. I saw a lot of people like with birds with broken wings. They don't know how to face the future again, and they are really overwhelmed. I worked now for 20 years in Gaza, and I think the last 20 years I always found a spot that you can recreate power or vitality. And the last time I was there, I thought it's gone. It's completely gone.
Yeah. No, and it's listening to words as such that I always find it so devastating that this conflict continues and continues. Shiri, you work on the other side of the border, so to speak. Right. Yeah, you've seen the children, the Israeli children of the south. What was the encounter with children and people after the war on that side of the border?
Well, they experience many traumatic symptoms because trauma occurs when there's a sense of threat to our physical or emotional well-being. And the symptoms of trauma can be cognitive, they can be emotional, and they could be physical. Children mainly don't talk about their emotions, they act them out. Right. So we see a lot of crying, of traumatized children finding it difficult to sleep, not willing to leave their house, not willing sometimes to leave the shelter, wanting their parents' comfort 24 hours, 7
24 hours a day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's important to note that except the traumatic symptoms, we also have life problems in many areas. These problems are intensified by the traumatic events and the rise in the national degree of anxiety.
Of anxiety, speaking of problems, apropos that goes hand in hand also with the situation in Gaza. And speaking of Gaza, because in the report that we saw, there are several, numbers that just to remind people what happened a year ago. And I'm always going to stress about the children because I think that's the future of the region and that's the frightening thing, that children of the region lose hope themselves. The conflict, for example, when we're looking at the conflict last year, the conflict was brutal, deadly, and terrifying, and we have those numbers. There we go. 551 children in Gaza alone were killed. 3,436 were injured, of whom 10% suffered permanent disability as a result. In Israel, 1 child was killed. 270 children were injured. And just looking at those left behind, that you realize what they're living with. Nightmares, on average, 7 out of 10 children in the worst-hit areas of Gaza are suffering from regular nightmares. Same goes on the other side of the border. But speaking of Gaza, as we continue this discussion here, I want to go straight to the resident of Gaza, activist Maha Mehana, is always gracious enough to talk to us on this show. Maha, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Who is treating the children of Gaza or kids that are, post-traumatized by the war last year?
And there are international organizations in Gaza like UNICEF, Save the Children, and other organizations that launch psychosocial programs for children. They're trying to help them through play therapy, through counseling. But children are still suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder because they still don't feel safe. They see that their ruined homes are still not rebuilt yet. They still see that no change happened on the ground since last summer. They are scared of balloons, of fireworks. They don't even enjoy a normal life like the rest of children in the world.
Yeah, and as you very well mentioned, it's also infrastructure and the fact that they're basically still living in the ruins of last year in many ways, correct?
Yes, yes, they still remember the events every single day. Many children witnessed family members killed in front, in front of their eyes. They witnessed their homes to be killed. I'm talking about the survivors, of course.
Right.
They witnessed their friends in schools who got killed. When they went back to school in the new school year, many children were missing in their classes. So you can imagine the effect of that on them.
No, entirely. And Jan, when you said to me a minute ago that when you came into the region and it was the first time that you felt like there was no hope.
Yeah.
Now, and you said that there's also a team documenting you. I want us to take a look, actually, at a clip from your film, from the film that was done about your work.
Oh, you have that?
Yes, we have this. Let's take a look, and this is about the work you did in Gaza after last year's war.
Yep.
Correct? Let's take a look.
Not you.
That's good. Yeah, that's good. Now you see, now it's coming out.
Okay, what is this technique? Yes.
It looks a little bit weird when you see it on the clip.
No.
Working on trauma is also very much on a physical level. There was a big study in Africa, and they looked to gazelles attacked by lions. And when there is a split second that the gazelle can escape, then it's traumatized. And then it's going away, find a place, and the animal is shivering to release the trauma. And
interesting, yeah.
Finding out that technique, I started to integrate that technique in working with people. So I let them shiver, I let them shout, I holding them very close. That's the work I'm doing.
No, and it's true. When you're listening to that, what kind of work does one do with kids? Because post-traumatic stress disorder, which, you know, it's something that adults know very well, soldiers know very well, journalists actually know very well in many ways. But for children, how is this, you know, the technique of that to me seems beautiful, by the way.
Yeah, well, we all of us live under the illusion that nothing bad will happen to us. And when traumatic events happen and disasters happen, it breaks our sense of continuity. Now, experiencing this at an early age changes the way we look at the world, ourselves, the way we look at others. Yeah. So we try to help kids, first of all, tell their story, to listen to them without judging them, without criticizing them, without telling them everything is going to be all right, which we love doing as adults, but it's not really helpful.
It's not right, because usually nothing is ever all right.
Exactly, so the illusion of control is shattered. So we try to mend the sense of continuity by telling their story, by validating, by anchoring, by resourcing, by doing physical techniques such as breathing and finding the channels of coping that is most suitable for the child. Like, for example, we got a call in our Iran's hotline, which got over 30,000 calls during the Gaza war, and he was saying, well, my 7-year-old won't stop crying. I tried everything, nothing helps, what do I do? So we spoke to the child, and it turns out she loves doing ballet. So we try to integrate that into the shelter. Right. That means when there's sirens going on, she finds the way that is most suitable for her to cope. And then we try to...
No, it's a fascinating idea. And I mean, I'm sure you both, you know, it's a wonderful notion to think about that, because a confession, I ran with my children to the shelter last year. My 2.5-year-old, you know, it took her, I kept lying to her that this is just a game, and I could do that for a certain amount of time because I was living in Tel Aviv. My fears, and I'm going to have to state it, that at Gaza, it's very hard for a parent to say this is just a game or we're just going into here. When you saw children in Gaza after the war, and children everywhere should not be experiencing war, to me, what could you explain to them, what could you give them as a form of technique to reinstill hope?
Okay. What we do is explaining them that there is nothing to explain. If you, and by the way, a lot of parents do the same, what you just said.
Yeah.
They are making a game out of it.
Yeah.
They are lying. They are changing reality. But the destruction is so massive
that you cannot
that you cannot hold it. And the risk is that the younger generation is losing trust in the older generation. So we let them talk.
Maybe they should. We're not doing such a great job. I'm just saying, but yeah, okay. If you look at the leaders here,
well, I think we're doing. I mean,
no, the parents. I was being facetious.
Yeah, well, even the lying is out of the best intention.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
It's trying to protect.
Exactly. I agree. It's important to take care of ourselves. Some of the parents don't realize that they are traumatized and they can't help their children when they don't find a way to cope and a way to deal with that before they go.
No, and it's a fascinating point. We have very little time left, but then I'm asking you, Jan and Shiri, do you find also that after you deal with these traumas, that you yourself, when you go into these areas, that you come out also scarred in many ways?
always when I come back, and especially the last time, I need counseling myself.
Right.
Because it's too overwhelming what you see, and it's something that your eyes can hardly bury.
Yeah.
That's it's as simple as that.
No.
Iran also is part of the ITC, the Israeli Trauma Coalition, and we do trainings around the world in disaster areas. And what we found is that many professionals suffer from secondary traumatization.
Exactly.
And although they know it cognitively, they don't find the time to take care of themselves. And sometimes the first time they get a chance to tell their story is months, maybe years after.
Sadly, all the time, you have incredibly important work that both of you are doing. Thank you very much for being with us. It's Shivering in Gaza, the film that comes out in Tel Aviv this week. Do try and catch it if you're in the region. Stay with us when we get back. Something entirely different, chocolate, but we'll explain when we get back. Now the news.